Before we begin, I want to ask you something. If stories like this speak to you, if you believe that the most important conversations often happen quietly, behind closed doors, if you care about family, honesty, and the courage it takes to be truly seen, then take a moment to support this channel. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that reminds us how powerful empathy can be. Here, we don't just tell stories. We explore the moments that quietly reshape lives. Now let's begin. The rain moved slowly across the kitchen window, sliding down the glass in thin, wandering trails. Each droplet followed its own uncertain path before merging with another and disappearing into the gray evening outside. Beyond the glass, the world looked blurred and distant. The streetlights glowed softly through the mist, and the trees outside swayed gently under the steady rhythm of falling rain. It was the kind of evening that made everything feel quieter than usual, as though the world itself had decided to whisper. Inside the house, the air felt still. Laura sat alone at the small wooden kitchen table. Her fingers curled loosely around a ceramic mug that had once held steaming tea. Now it had cooled, forgotten. She hadn't taken a sip in several minutes. Not because she didn't want to, but because her mind was elsewhere. Her thoughts were louder than the rain. Something had changed in the house. She couldn't pinpoint exactly when it started. Maybe it had been a week ago. Maybe two. It was difficult to say. The shift had been subtle at first, so subtle that she had almost ignored it. But a mother's intuition has a way of noticing things long before logic catches up. And Laura knew something wasn't right. Her son Ethan had been different lately. Not dramatically different. Nothing obvious. But quieter. And not the peaceful kind of quiet that comes with comfort. This quiet felt heavier. Ethan had always been the opposite of quiet. Ever since he was little, he had filled every room he entered with energy. He had been the kind of kid who talked constantly, about school, about friends, about random thoughts that popped into his head. He told stories the moment he walked through the front door. Sometimes they were exaggerated. Sometimes they barely made sense. But they were always enthusiastic. He would reenact moments from his day with dramatic gestures, mimicking his teachers, laughing about something ridiculous that happened in the cafeteria, or describing the latest classroom disaster as if it were a scene from a movie. Laura loved those moments. They made the house feel alive. Even when Ethan had a stressful day, he talked about it. If he had failed a math quiz, he would complain loudly while raiding the fridge. If a friend had said something annoying, he would rant about it for 10 minutes before eventually laughing it off. He never kept things inside. Until recently. Over the past couple of weeks, the stories had stopped. Ethan still came home from school, but instead of launching into conversation, he would simply say hello and disappear into the living room, or his bedroom, or wherever silence felt safest. Laura's eyes drifted toward the hallway. His bedroom door was closed again. She stared at it for a moment longer than necessary. It wasn't the physical distance that worried her. It was the emotional one. The space that grows quietly between people, when something important goes unspoken. From the living room, she heard the faint scrape of a fork against a plate. Ethan was out there now, sitting on the couch with a container of leftovers. He wasn't eating much, just pushing food around. His phone rested beside him on the cushion, screen dark. That alone was unusual. Most teenagers would rather give up oxygen than ignore their phones for 10 minutes. Laura took a slow breath. Parenting didn't come with a guidebook for moments like this. There were no clear instructions for when your child seemed lost in thoughts they didn't know how to share. All you could do was listen. Wait. Be available. So she waited. The clock ticked softly on the wall. Rain tapped against the windows. Minutes passed. Then finally, "Mom." Ethan's voice drifted in from the living room. It wasn't loud, but there was something fragile in it. Laura immediately sat up straighter. "Yes." There was a pause. Then Ethan spoke again. "Can I talk to you about something?" Her heart tightened instantly. Those words can mean many things when they come from a teenager. Sometimes they mean trouble. Sometimes confusion. Sometimes something far more vulnerable. Laura carefully placed the mug down on the table and stood. She walked into the living room slowly, not wanting to rush the moment. Ethan sat on the couch, shoulders slightly hunched, staring down at his hands. He looked nervous. Laura didn't stand over him like an authority figure. Instead, she pulled a chair closer and sat beside him so they were at the same level. It was a small gesture, but an important one. "I'm listening," she said gently. "You can tell me anything." Ethan didn't respond right away. His fingers tugged at the sleeve of his sweatshirt, twisting the fabric between nervous hands. He swallowed. Once. Then again. Some moments stretch longer than others. Seconds begin to feel like minutes. The air in the room seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Ethan spoke. "I think." His voice faltered. He looked down again before finishing the sentence. "I think I might be gay." The words settled quietly between them. They didn't explode. They didn't shatter the room. They simply existed. Real. Honest. And fragile. Laura felt a wave of emotion rise inside her chest. But it wasn't shock. It wasn't disappointment. What she felt most strongly was something else entirely. Protectiveness. Because in those 7 words, she heard more than a statement about identity. She heard fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of misunderstanding. Fear that the person he trusted most might suddenly see him differently. Without hesitation, Laura reached forward and took Ethan's hand. "Thank you for telling me," she said softly. Ethan slowly lifted his eyes. They were uncertain. Searching. Like someone bracing for an outcome they couldn't predict. "I don't even know if it's true," he whispered. "I don't know what I am." His voice cracked slightly. "What if I don't fit anywhere?" Laura leaned closer and wrapped her arms around him. For a moment, Ethan felt smaller than 17. He felt like the little boy who used to run into her room after nightmares. The child who once asked if monsters could hide inside closets. The kid who believed his mother could solve any problem. "You're still you," she murmured gently. "That hasn't changed. And you're not going to figure this out alone." Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside, something had shifted. Not a storm, but the beginning of understanding. That night, long after Ethan went to bed, Laura remained at the kitchen table. The rain had stopped hours ago, but her thoughts were still moving quickly. Not because she doubted her son. She didn't. What worried her was the world. She knew how harsh it could be. She had seen headlines, heard careless jokes, watched people shrink themselves just to survive environments that refused to understand them. Her job wasn't to have all the answers. Her job was to be his anchor, the one safe place he could always return to. The next morning arrived quietly. Sunlight pushed through thinning clouds. The air outside smelled fresh, the way it always does after rain, clean and hopeful. Ethan shuffled into the kitchen looking tired but calmer. Laura poured him a glass of orange juice. "Want to go for a walk later?" she asked casually. He hesitated. Just briefly. Then nodded. "Yeah, okay." The park wasn't far from their house. Leaves scattered across the pathway, crunching under their shoes as they walked. Children laughed somewhere near the playground. Dogs barked in the distance. Life continued as it always did. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan exhaled slowly. "What if I'm wrong?" he asked. Laura glanced at him. "What if I'm just confused?" She noticed the way his shoulders curved inward, as if bracing for judgment. "It's okay not to know yet," she said gently. "You don't have to figure everything out today." Understanding yourself, she explained, wasn't a race. They reached a bench beneath a large oak tree and sat down. Sunlight filtered through the branches above them. For the first time, Ethan began talking freely. About moments he didn't understand. About noticing a classmate's smile lingering longer than it should. About laughing harder at someone's jokes simply because he liked being near them. He talked about locker room conversations that made him uncomfortable. About jokes his friends made that suddenly felt personal. Laura didn't interrupt. She simply listened. Sometimes that's the most powerful form of support. When Ethan finished speaking, he looked exhausted, like someone who had finally set down a heavy weight. "What if my friends don't understand?" he asked quietly. Laura thought for a moment before answering. "Then they'll show you who they really are. And the ones who truly care about you will stay." Ethan frowned slightly. "That sounds simple." "It isn't," she admitted. "But pretending to be someone you're not hurts far more." Weeks passed. The house slowly returned to conversation. Not constant certainty, but dialogue. Small steps. One evening while cooking dinner together, Ethan spoke again. I don't think I'm ready to tell anyone else yet. That's okay, Laura replied. You get to move at your own pace. He nodded thoughtfully. I just don't want this to be the only thing people see about me. Laura turned toward him. It won't be, she said firmly. You are 100 things before any label. Ethan smiled faintly, and inside that quiet smile was something new. Not certainty, but courage. A few weeks later, rain returned, but this time it felt different. Ethan stood by the same kitchen window where Laura once sat alone. He watched the droplets slide down the glass. Mom, he called. She joined him. I told Jake today. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. What did he say? Ethan smiled. He said, Okay, cool. Want to play video games? Laura laughed, an honest, relieved laugh. That's it. That's it. Ethan looked at her again. Calmer now. Clearer. I think I'm going to be okay. Laura wrapped an arm around his shoulders. I know you will. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the window. Not as a warning, not as a storm, but as a quiet reminder. Growth often begins in uncertainty. And inside that warm kitchen, supported by patience, trust, and unconditional love, a young person continued discovering who he was meant to be. If this story touched your heart, remember to subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes a single conversation can change a life.